There was a $200 notice taped to my own front door for parking in my own driveway on my own property on a Tuesday afternoon. When I called the HOA to ask which rule I'd broken, the woman on the phone said something that still makes my blood boil to this day. The board doesn't need a specific rule if the board doesn't like what it sees. I stood in my kitchen, phone shaking in my hand, staring at that little pink slip of paper, and I remember thinking one word clear as a bell. No, not this time. I was about to become the most annoying homeowner Maplebrook Estates had ever seen, and I hadn't even opened the bylaws yet. My name doesn't matter for this story. Just call me the guy at 214 Birchwood Lane. 3 years ago, my wife and I bought a modest 4-bedroom in Maplebrook Estates, a gated community of 212 homes about 20 minutes outside the city. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, a koi pond at the entrance that somehow always looked freshly raked. It was the kind of place that photographed beautifully for the listing and felt, for the first 2 years, like exactly what we wanted. Quiet streets, good schools nearby, neighbors who waved. I work from home most days, running a small logistics consulting business out of a converted office upstairs. My wife teaches 3rd grade. We have 2 cars, a work truck for my side projects, and a mother who visits most weekends because her assisted living facility is only 15 minutes away. I tell you all of this because it matters later. I was not the guy blasting music at midnight. I was not letting my grass go brown. I mowed on Saturdays, edged the walkway, and paid my HOA dues of $190 a month without complaint, even when I privately thought the landscaping fee was a racket. The HOA was run by a 5-person volunteer board, and the board was run in practice by one woman, Deborah Whitfield, 61 years old, retired from 30 years in municipal code enforcement, and president of the Maplebrook Estates Homeowners Association for 4 consecutive terms. She drove a white Lexus, wore sunglasses even in the rain, and had opinions about your trash cans that she was not shy about sharing. Most people just complied. It was easier than arguing. I used to be one of those people. I'd seen what happened to people who didn't comply. The Hendersons at 190 Birchwood spent an entire summer fighting a fine over a garden gnome collection Deborah called visual clutter inconsistent with community standards. They eventually just paid it and put the gnomes in storage. A single dad 2 blocks over got cited for a portable basketball hoop that had apparently spent one Saturday afternoon too many at the edge of his driveway. Everyone in Maplebrook had a story like that. We told them at block parties, half laughing, half wincing, and then we went home and made sure our own lawns were exactly the right shade of green. That Tuesday, I'd run to the grocery store for maybe 40 minutes. Milk, bread, the ingredients for the lasagna my mother-in-law had requested. I pulled into my own driveway, unloaded 4 bags, and went inside. I didn't think about my car again until 6 that evening, when I stepped outside to grab the mail and found a bright pink violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox post. $200. Violation code listed as unauthorized vehicle storage in the front yard setback area. My car had been in my driveway for less than an hour. I called the management company that handled the HOA's books first thing the next morning. A receptionist transferred me twice before Deborah herself picked up, which told me exactly how small this organization really was. Mrs. Whitfield, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I got a fine yesterday for parking in my own driveway. I was there 40 minutes. Can you point me to the specific rule I violated? There was a pause. Then, the driveway apron closest to the street is considered part of the community's curb appeal zone. The board has discretion over vehicles visible from the roadway. Discretion, I repeated. Is that in the CC and RS? Can you give me a section number? I don't have that memorized, sir. I'd have to look. But I can tell you the board voted on this at our last meeting and the fine stands. You voted on my car specifically. We voted on enforcement priorities for the season, she said, and I could hear the practiced patience in her voice, the tone of someone who'd said this exact sentence to a dozen other homeowners. If you'd like to appeal, you can submit a written request. But I'll be honest with you, the board doesn't need a specific rule if the board doesn't like what it sees. We have broad authority under the governing documents. I hung up more confused than angry. Not yet anyway, that would come later. I told my wife about it over dinner and she laughed, actually laughed, because it sounded so absurd. They fined you for parking in your own driveway, she said, for 40 minutes. I laughed too at first. $200 felt like a nuisance fee, the kind of thing you pay and forget. I almost did exactly that. I want you to remember that moment, because 3 weeks later I would understand just how close I came to letting this go and just how much that would have cost me. Friday came and went. I hadn't paid the fine yet, mostly out of stubbornness, and mostly because I still hadn't seen a single rule that said what I'd done was wrong. Then, the following Tuesday, a second notice appeared, this one taped directly to my front door instead of the mailbox. $400. Not a new violation, the same one doubled with a line at the bottom that made my stomach drop. Continued noncompliance may result in a lien being filed against the property within 30 days per association policy. A lien on my house. For parking in my own driveway for 40 minutes to buy groceries. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Ray, while we were both out getting the mail that evening. He winced before I'd even finished the sentence. "You paid it yet?" he asked. "No," I said. "You should," he said, lowering his voice like Deborah might be listening from her Lexus. "I fought a fine 2 years ago over my fence stain. Cost me more in stress than the actual fine ever would have. They don't budge, man, they just wait you out." I told him I wasn't so sure this time. He shrugged and said, "Your funeral," and went back inside. I stood in my driveway a little longer than I needed to, looking at the exact spot where my car had been parked, and I realized Ray's warning had done the opposite of what he intended. It made me want to see this through more, not less. I called the management office again, and this time I asked for something specific. A copy of the CC and RS, the bylaws, and the enforcement policy in writing sent to my email. The woman who answered, not Deborah this time, sounded almost embarrassed. "Most people don't ask for that," she admitted. It took 11 days and 2 follow-up emails before a 47-page PDF finally landed in my inbox. I remember opening it on a Thursday night at the kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, half expecting to find nothing useful. I was wrong. Article 7, Section 3. Resident-owned licensed and currently registered passenger vehicles may be parked in the owner's private driveway without restriction as to duration provided the vehicle does not constitute long-term storage defined herein as continuous parking, exceeding 7 consecutive days. And provided the vehicle is not a commercial vehicle exceeding 1 ton in gross weight. My car was a 4-year-old Honda Accord. It had been there for 40 minutes. There was no version of this document, no matter how many times I read it, where I was in violation. But it got better, or worse depending on how you look at it. Article 12, the enforcement section, laid out a mandatory process before any fine could be issued, a written notice of the alleged violation. A 30-day cure period during which the homeowner could correct the issue or request a hearing before the board. Only after that window closed, and only if the violation continued, could a monetary fine actually be assessed. I had received a fine on the very first notice. No cure period. No hearing offered. Not even close to what their own governing documents required. I sat with that for a long moment, coffee gone completely cold now, rereading Article 7 a third time just to make sure I wasn't fooling myself. I wasn't. And then something else occurred to me, something that made the whole thing click into place. I got up, walked to my front window, and looked 2 houses down, where Deborah Whitfield's driveway sat in plain view of the street, in the exact same curb appeal zone she'd cited to me. Her adult son's truck had been parked there in that same spot every single weekend for over a year. I'd seen it 100 times and never thought twice. Not once had I heard of a fine going to that address, not a pink notice, not a phone call, not so much as a strongly worded email. I started keeping a folder that night, screenshots of the emailed CC and RS, photos of my own driveway timestamped. And over the following 2 weekends, quiet photos of the truck 2 doors down, also timestamped, also parked in the exact same setback zone Deborah had described to me as off-limits. I had no idea yet how far I'd end up taking this, but I knew one thing for certain, sitting there at my kitchen table with a stack of printed pages and a folder full of receipts. This was no longer about $200. It had stopped being about the money the moment I read that second notice, threatening a lien on my house. Before I did anything else, I wanted to be sure I wasn't misreading the document. So I called a neighbor 2 streets over who happened to be a real estate attorney, a guy named Marcus I mostly knew from block parties. I read him Article 7 and Article 12 over the phone. He was quiet for a second, then let out a low whistle. "They fined you before the cure period even started," he said. "That's not just wrong, that's a due process violation under their own governing documents. If they file a lien on that basis, you'd have a very strong case to have it voided, and depending on your state, you could potentially recover attorney's fees." He also told me something I hadn't considered. Most homeowners never actually read their CC and RS. Boards count on it. 90% of enforcement is bluff, Marcus said. The second someone shows up with the actual document and a highlighter, most boards fold. You'd be amazed how far the board has discretion gets them, right up until somebody asks to see it in writing. I also called the county recorder's office to pull the officially recorded version of the covenants, just to make sure the copy I'd been emailed was current and hadn't been quietly amended. It matched word for word. Whatever Deborah believed her authority to be, it wasn't written down anywhere that mattered. There was a regular board meeting scheduled for the second Tuesday of the following month, open to all homeowners. Agenda posted 72 hours in advance as required by the association's own bylaws. I requested to be added to the agenda under homeowner comments, and specifically listed my topic as Enforcement Policy Compliance Review. I printed 3 copies of Article 7, 3 copies of Article 12, 3 copies of my 2 violation notices with dates highlighted, and a single photograph of the son's truck, timestamped, parked in that exact curb appeal zone. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, folding chairs arranged in rows, maybe 20 homeowners scattered around the room, the air conditioning working just hard enough to make it noticeably too cold. Deborah sat at the front table between the treasurer and the secretary, gavel in hand like she chaired the county commission instead of a subdivision. I recognized the Hendersons in the 3rd row and Ray near the back, arms crossed, clearly there for the show. When my name was called, I stood, walked to the small podium and set my folder down. My hands were sweating. I hadn't expected that. I'm here about the 2 violation notices I received last month, I said, totaling $400 for parking my own car in my own driveway for approximately 40 minutes. I held up the printed pages. According to Article 7, Section 3 of our recorded covenants, resident vehicles are permitted in private driveways without duration restriction unless parked continuously for 7 or more days. Mine was there for less than 1 hour. Deborah's jaw tightened. The board has discretion over vehicles visible from the street, she said, the same line, word for word, from our first phone call. I don't see that discretion written anywhere in the document the association itself provided me, I said. What I do see is Article 12, which requires a written notice, a 30-day cure period, and an opportunity for a hearing before any fine is assessed. I received a fine on the first notice with no cure period offered. A murmur moved through the folding chairs. The treasurer leaned over and whispered something to Deborah that I couldn't hear. I kept going because I wasn't finished. I also want to note for the record that the vehicle parked in the same curb appeal zone at 218 Birchwood Lane has been there most weekends for over a year without a single notice being issued. I set the timestamped photo on the table in front of her. I didn't say her son's name. I didn't have to. Every person in that room understood exactly whose driveway that was. Deborah's face had gone a shade paler than her usual composed pink. Are you accusing this board of selective enforcement? She said, and her voice had lost every bit of its practiced calm. I'm asking why the same rule applied differently to 2 houses on the same street, I said. And I'm asking the board to rescind these fines, remove the violation from my file, and confirm in writing that future enforcement will follow the process outlined in Article 12. If not, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the state's HOA Regulatory Division and consulting an attorney about a breach of fiduciary duty claim against the board. The room went very quiet. Deborah looked at the treasurer. The treasurer looked at the secretary. Someone near the back actually started clapping before catching themselves and stopping. We'll take this under advisement, Deborah finally said, and follow up with the homeowner directly. I sat back down, hands still shaking a little, and for the first time in 6 weeks I felt like I could breathe. 9 days later, a letter arrived. Not a violation notice this time. An official rescission on association letterhead stating that both fines had been voided, the violation flagged for removal from my property file, and that the board would be reviewing its enforcement procedures to ensure compliance with Article 12 going forward. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing. But the $400 was gone, and so apparently was the appetite to fight me on it. 6 weeks after that, a notice went out to all homeowners announcing Deborah Whitfield's resignation from the board, citing personal reasons. I don't know exactly what conversations happened behind closed doors, and I've never asked. What I do know is that within a month, the new board sent out an updated enforcement policy, mailed to every household, spelling out the cure period and hearing rights in plain language, the kind that couldn't be casually waved away over the phone. A few neighbors started stopping by half joking, half not, asking if I'd read their notice too. One woman brought over banana bread and a copy of a violation she'd been too intimidated to fight for 2 years. A $250 fine over a mailbox flag, she said, had never once been on the approved color list, mostly because there had never actually been an approved color list. Ray showed up on a Sunday with a six-pack and admitted a little sheepishly that maybe he should have fought his fence stain fine after all. Even the Hendersons got their gnomes back out of storage, one at a time, like they were testing the water. I think about that first phone call sometimes. The board doesn't need a specific rule if the board doesn't like what it sees. It sounded so certain, so final, and it was completely, provably false sitting right there in a document I was entitled to all along. Most of us sign whatever packet gets handed to us at closing and never look at it again, trusting that whoever's in charge actually knows the rules better than we do. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're just counting on you never asking to see them in writing. I still have that pink notice, by the way, framed, actually hanging in my home office right above the shelf where I keep the folder. It reminds me that a 47-page PDF I almost never bothered opening ended up saving me $400, a lien on my house, and a whole lot of nights lying awake wondering if I was crazy for pushing back. If you've got your own HOA horror story, one where you fought back or wish you had, I'd genuinely like to hear it in the comments below. And if this one had you yelling at your screen right along with me, you know exactly what to do with that subscribe button.